The December frost etched silver patterns across the meadow as 7 mounted outlaws silently approached Vera Donovan's isolated cabin nestled in the shadow of Widow's Peak. Their leader, Nathaniel Cross, flashed a wolf-like grin as his eyes fell on the thin wisp of smoke rising from the chimney, one woman alone in Deadfall Valley, sitting on the richest, unexploited copper deposit in the Arizona Territory. What Cross and his notorious Desolation Gang didn't know was that before becoming a solitary homesteader, Vera Donovan had been Lieutenant Vera Nightshade Monroe, the Army's foremost expert in terrain manipulation and ambush tactics during the Apache campaigns. Every path to her modest cabin had been transformed into an intricate web of deadfalls, spring-loaded snares, and pressure-triggered hazards that had claimed the lives of 3 previous intruders. Some mistakes you only make once, and the Desolation Gang was about to make their last. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning mist clung to the forest floor as Vera Donovan worked methodically in her root cellar, checking the tension on a complex system of wires that ran beneath the frost-hardened ground and connected to various trigger mechanisms across her 20-acre property. At 52, her hands still moved with the practiced precision of someone for whom attention to detail had been a matter of life and death. The network of tripwires and pressure plates represented 5 years of careful planning, not paranoia, but preparation. Vera emerged from the cellar into the biting December air, her breath clouding before her as she surveyed the perimeter of her property with eyes that missed nothing. Most visitors to her cabin remarked on their unusual color, one green, one amber, but few realized how those mismatched eyes catalogued every detail, assessed every shadow for potential threats, a habit formed through 15 years of military service in some of the most hostile terrain in the American West. The cabin itself appeared unremarkable, a sturdy structure of pine logs with a stone chimney and a covered porch facing the valley below. What casual observers never noticed were the carefully disguised defensive modifications Vera had incorporated. The steps to the porch were spaced at irregular intervals, forcing visitors to watch their footing rather than their surroundings. The seemingly decorative riverstones lining the path concealed pressure triggers that activated warning systems inside. Even the chimney had been constructed with specialized channels that allowed Vera to fill the surrounding area with smoke if necessary. Vera moved with quiet efficiency as she completed her morning routine, checking water barrels, feeding her 3 horses, and testing the triggers on select traps around the perimeter. Her isolated homestead sat in a natural bowl surrounded by pine-covered hills with just 4 main approaches, each now rigged with progressively more severe deterrents. She preferred that unwanted visitors be captured rather than killed, but experience had taught her that some men only understood the final deterrent. The silver streak in her otherwise raven hair caught the morning light as she knelt to reset a displacement trigger that had been activated by a passing deer during the night. Her weathered hands, strong and nimble despite the old burn scars that covered her left palm, expertly manipulated the mechanism with minimal movement. These were not the hands of a simple widow, but of a woman who had spent years crafting instruments of war and survival. Inside her cabin, evidence of Vera's true nature was more apparent. One wall held detailed topographical maps of the surrounding valley, marked with notations about lines of sight, choke points, and potential cover. A bookshelf contained volumes on engineering and botany, alongside medical texts with pages dedicated to both healing remedies and plant-derived toxins. In a locked trunk beneath her bed lay the remnants of her military past, a cavalry saber, a Sharps rifle modified with specialized sights, and a leather-bound journal filled with diagrams of terrain-based defensive systems. As Vera stoked the Fire in her stone hearth, her thoughts drifted to the letter she'd received from Marshal Hollister during her monthly supply run to Copper Springs 2 weeks prior. Reports of the Desolation Gang moving into the territory troubled her more than she'd let on to the curious townsfolk. She'd been tracking Cross and his men through conversations with travelers and traders who occasionally sought shelter at her cabin, noting patterns in their movements that pointed toward mining interests rather than simple banditry. The 15-mile ride into Copper Springs was the only regular contact Vera maintained with the outside world. The frontier settlement had grown considerably in the 3 years since she'd claimed her homestead, expanding from a simple trading post to a proper town with a hotel, 2 saloons, and a territorial office. As always, Vera approached these visits with calculated caution, maintaining the persona of the reserved widow who'd moved west for a fresh start after losing her husband in the war. Widow Donovan keeps to herself, the townspeople would say. Peculiar, but pleasant enough. Few had reason to connect the solitary woman with the legendary Lieutenant Monroe, whose tactics were still studied by military officers across the Western Territories. The memory of her last visit to town lingered as she prepared a pot of coffee. As she'd loaded supplies onto her packhorse outside Weber's General Store, young Deputy Clark had approached with unusual urgency. "Mrs. Donovan," he'd said in a lowered voice, "thought you should know there's been men asking questions about property claims in Deadfall Valley. Marshal's concerned, what with your place being so isolated." Vera had thanked him with the measured warmth she allowed herself in public interactions, neither confirming nor dismissing his concerns. The deputy had hesitated before adding, "These aren't ordinary prospectors, ma'am. One of them's Nathaniel Cross. His gang left 3 homesteaders dead last month over in Diablo Canyon." The name had sent a ripple of recognition through her, though she'd kept her expression neutral. Nathaniel Cross had been a scout for the army before turning to outlawry, skilled in tracking, knowledgeable about terrain, and reportedly ruthless in his pursuit of wealth. A more dangerous adversary than the typical bandits who occasionally tested her defenses. Now, as she sipped her bitter coffee, Vera mentally revisited each of her defensive preparations. The primary approaches to her cabin were protected by a series of increasingly severe measures, early warnings followed by entanglements, followed by incapacitating mechanisms. The northern trail featured a series of covered pits with angled stakes. The western approach contained tripwires connected to suspended log traps. The eastern path held a sequence of spring-loaded snares, and the southern trail, which appeared most inviting, concealed the most elaborate system of all, a triggered rock slide that could completely seal the narrow pass. Vera had been careful to ensure that legitimate visitors, the occasional trader or lost traveler, would approach via the main path to her front door, which remained safe provided they stayed on the marked trail indicated by the seemingly decorative stones. Those with ill intent invariably sought more concealed approaches, triggering her warning systems long before they reached the cabin. The sudden silence of the forest birds pulled Vera from her thoughts. She stilled, head tilted slightly as she listened to the language of the forest. The birds had gone quiet along the western perimeter. Something or someone was moving with enough purpose to disturb them. Not a natural predator, which would cause alarm calls rather than silence. Moving with practiced stealth, Vera crossed to the western window, careful to remain out of sight as she used a small mirror positioned on the sill to survey the tree line. A flicker of movement caught her eye, the dull gleam of metal reflecting morning light where no metal should be. A rifle barrel, partially concealed among the pines, approximately 80 yards from her western boundary marker. Observer, reconnaissance, the first stage of a coordinated approach. Vera's expression remained impassive as she continued her morning routine, giving no indication that she'd detected the watcher. She moved with deliberate normality, feeding her chickens in the small coop beside the cabin, carrying water from the well, splitting kindling for the evening fire. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. All the while, her awareness remained fixed on the presence in the forest, cataloging. Every shift in position, every moment the watcher's attention focused on specific aspects of her property. The observer was good, better than the average bandit. He remained nearly invisible, changing positions with minimal disturbance, studying the cabin and its surroundings with methodical patience. She recognized the techniques of military scout training, confirming her suspicion that this was likely one of Cross's men. Through careful observation in her mirrors, she tracked him for nearly an hour as he mapped her routine, noted the location of her livestock, water source, and the apparent defensibility of her cabin. What he couldn't see were the pressure plates. Beneath innocuous-looking flat stones, the tripwires concealed by morning frost, or the fact that the apparent game trails leading to her clearing were the only paths not rigged with defensive measures, a counterintuitive approach that had served her well against previous intruders. When the observer finally withdrew into the deeper forest, Vera allowed herself a grim smile. He'd missed every significant defensive feature she'd installed, cataloging instead the superficial aspects of a seemingly vulnerable homestead. The coming confrontation was now inevitable, but she'd been preparing for this moment since claiming the land that mining interests had been circling for years. As midday approached, Vera made adjustments to several trigger mechanisms, tightening wires that had loosened in the cold and resetting pressure plates that had shifted with the freezing and thawing of the ground. Each trap was a component in a larger system, designed to funnel intruders into predetermined containment zones, or to incapacitate them at strategically advantageous points within her perimeter. The afternoon faded toward evening, the winter sun making its early retreat behind Widow's Peak. Vera completed her preparations with the methodical efficiency that had once made her the Army's premier defensive tactician. She adjusted the specialized shutters on each window, reinforced wood panels with narrow viewing slits that could be secured from inside. She positioned water barrels strategically around the cabin, both for firefighting and as potential cover. Finally, she retrieved her weapons from their hidden compartments, a Winchester rifle, a Navy Colt revolver that had belonged to her husband, and a shotgun loaded with custom-packed shells. As dusk settled over the valley, Vera detected the first clear sign of imminent threat, a flash of light from the ridge to the north, likely a signal mirror catching the last rays of the setting sun. She moved to her observation position, using her system of mirrors to scan the surrounding forest, without exposing herself directly. There, at the edge of her expanded visibility, she counted 4 riders moving into position along the northern perimeter, maintaining enough distance to remain outside what they presumed to be her awareness. They were establishing a cordon, positioning themselves to control all approaches to the cabin. Standard military encirclement tactics, executed with a precision that confirmed her assessment of Cross's background. Vera noted their positions on her mental map, correlating their locations with her defensive preparations. 2 had taken positions, where her early warning systems would detect any advance. 1 had unwittingly settled near a triggered deadfall, and the 4th had chosen a position directly above a pressure-activated snare. With practiced calm, Vera continued her evening routine, lighting lamps visible through the windows and creating the impression of an ordinary night. She moved through her cabin with the quiet precision of someone accustomed to operating in hostile territory, each action serving both its apparent domestic purpose and a tactical function. As she prepared a simple meal, her senses remained attuned to the perimeter, listening for the subtle indicators that would signal an intruder, triggering one of her early warning systems. The first came shortly after full darkness had settled. A nearly imperceptible vibration in the floorboards beneath the western window, transmitted through underground wires connected to a perimeter alarm. Someone had crossed her outer boundary, triggering the first in a series of increasingly sensitive detection mechanisms. Vera counted silently, waiting for the second signal. When it came 3 minutes later, a faint tinkling from a cluster of bells hidden inside a hollow wall section, she knew they were advancing with caution, maintaining proper spacing between scouts, disciplined, coordinated, professional in their approach. Precisely as she had anticipated from men led by a former military scout, through her carefully positioned mirrors, Vera detected movement along the tree line, shadows shifting against shadows, barely discernible even to her trained eye. They were using the darkness effectively, approaching during the new moon when visibility was most limited. She counted 6 distinct figures now, moving in a standard envelopment pattern toward her cabin. The 7th would be Cross himself, likely observing from a command position with good visibility of the entire operation. The soft snap of her first active defensive measure, breaking the night's silence, confirmed her count. A startled grunt followed. By hurried whispers, indicated one of the approaching men had encountered a low tripwire, not designed to injure, but to alert her to their position and approach vector. The momentary pause in their advance told her they were reassessing, likely surprised to encounter any defensive measures around what appeared to be an isolated widow's cabin. Vera moved silently to her eastern window, using her mirror system to scan the approaching shadows. There, a figure crouching beside the large pine at the edge of her clearing, now conferring with a second shadow that had materialized from the darkness. Their gestures suggested disagreement, likely about the presence of the tripwire and whether it indicated awareness of their approach or was simply a precaution against predators. A sharp whistle cut through the night, 3 short notes in a pattern no bird would make. A signal to continue the advance, despite the discovered tripwire. Vera's eyes narrowed slightly. She'd expected more caution from experienced men. Their confidence suggested they still believed the element of surprise remained theirs, that a simple tripwire was the extent of her defenses. The next tripwire would correct that misconception. She didn't have to wait long. A mechanical snap followed. By a heavy whoosh of air announced the activation of her first major defensive trap. A startled shout cut off abruptly as one of the approaching figures triggered a spring-loaded snare that hoisted him 6 feet into the air, suspended by a reinforced rope that had been tested to hold twice the weight of an average man. The sudden commotion froze the remaining shadows at the edge of her clearing, their disciplined approach disrupted by the unexpected effectiveness of her defenses. "Jefferson's caught in some kind of trap," a voice hissed from the darkness, loud enough to carry to her waiting ears. "Cut him down," came the response, a voice of authority accustomed to being obeyed. "And watch your step. The woman's got the place rigged." Vera allowed herself a thin smile. They still believed they faced simple traps rather than a comprehensive, defensive system. The snared man was struggling now, swinging uselessly as he tried to reach the rope that held him suspended between earth and sky. His companions would need to expose themselves to assist him, moving into the open clearing where her sight lines were unobstructed. 2 figures darted from the tree line toward their suspended comrade, while the others maintained their positions, rifles now clearly visible as they provided covering fire if necessary. Vera watched through her mirror as the men reached the struggling figure, one standing guard while the other produced a knife to cut the rope. Neither noticed the pressure plate beneath the seemingly solid ground until their combined weight triggered it with an ominous click. The effect was immediate and dramatically different from the simple snare. A section of earth collapsed beneath them, sending all three men tumbling into a concealed pit 8 feet deep. Their startled shouts echoed across the clearing as they landed in the chamber. Vera had spent weeks excavating and reinforcing with timber supports. Not deep enough to cause serious injury, but more than sufficient to contain men who had expected to be the hunters rather than the captured. The sudden loss of 3 men in rapid succession transformed the disciplined approach into confusion. Vera detected urgent movement at the edge of the clearing as the remaining outlaws reassessed their increasingly precarious situation. Through her mirror, she watched as a tall figure emerged from deeper shadow, gesturing emphatically as he took command of the faltering operation. Nathaniel Cross had joined his men directly, abandoning his observation position to salvage what remained of their assault plan. Even in the darkness, Vera recognized his distinctive silhouette, broad-shouldered and commanding, moving with the confidence of a man accustomed to controlling his environment rather than being controlled by it. "Hold positions," Cross ordered, his voice carrying clearly in the night air. "This is no ordinary homestead. The woman's prepared." Vera moved to her front window, keeping to the shadows as she observed Cross organizing his remaining men. His tactical adjustment was immediate and professional, abandoning the direct approach in favor of establishing a secure perimeter while he assessed this unexpected development. She counted 3 men still operational besides Cross himself, now taking covered positions at the edge of the clearing rather than continuing their advance. Vera checked her Winchester, confirming it was loaded and ready. The confrontation had entered a new phase. The initial surprise of her defensive measures had disrupted their coordinated approach, but Cross was regrouping rather than retreating. His next move would reveal much about his ultimate intentions and capabilities. "Mrs. Donovan," Cross called out, his voice carrying a forced politeness that did nothing to mask the underlying threat. "It seems we've encountered some difficulties approaching your home. Perhaps we could speak like civilized folk rather than continuing this unpleasantness." Vera remained silent, watching through her mirror as Cross waited for a response. His men maintained their positions, rifles at the ready, covering the cabin's main approaches. The 3 captured outlaws could be heard muttering curses from the pit, their protests ignored by their leader as he focused on this unexpected challenge. "Mrs. Donovan," Cross called again, an edge of impatience entering his voice. "I represent certain interests, willing to pay handsomely for your property. There's no need for anyone to get hurt here. Business is business." Vera moved silently to another position, maintaining her tactical advantage through mobility. The darkness inside the cabin concealed her movements, while the lit lamp created the impression of a static defender. It was a technique she had perfected during her military service, creating the illusion of fewer defenders than actually present, though in this case she was simply creating the illusion of being in multiple places simultaneously. "I know you're listening, Mrs. Donovan," Cross continued, his practiced charm fraying slightly at the edges. "No ordinary widow rigs defensive traps of this caliber. Clearly, you're a woman of unusual skills and foresight. Such talents would be better rewarded in civilization than wasted in this wilderness." Vera considered her options carefully. Remaining silent would maintain the psychological advantage of uncertainty, but eventually Cross would commit to a more aggressive approach out of frustration. Engaging might provide insight into his true objectives while potentially dividing his remaining forces through negotiation. "Your men triggered warnings, Mr. Cross," she finally responded, her voice calm and measured. "Had they approached my front door openly, they'd have encountered no resistance." A moment of silence followed her words. Vera watched through her mirror as Cross processed this information, his head tilting slightly in surprise at being addressed by name. "You know, me," he observed, reassessing the situation with newfound caution. "Your reputation precedes you," Vera replied. Former Army scout, now leading the Desolation Gang. 7 men, specialized in claiming resource-rich properties through intimidation or elimination of rightful owners. Through her observation system, Vera noted how this accurate assessment caused Cross to scan the darkness surrounding her cabin with increased wariness, clearly unsettled by her level of intelligence. "You're well informed for a widow in an isolated valley," he said, suspicion now evident in his tone. "Isolation provides ample time for research," Vera responded, "just as it provides time for preparation." She watched Cross process this statement, noting how his posture shifted subtly from confident aggression to measured caution. He signaled to his men, directing them to maintain their positions, while adjusting their coverage to be more defensive than offensive in orientation. "It seems we've underestimated you, Mrs. Donovan," Cross acknowledged, his voice carrying a new note of professional respect. "Though I remain curious how an ordinary homesteader acquired military-grade defensive training." Vera moved to another observation position, maintaining her advantage through unpredictability. "Your assumption that I'm an ordinary homesteader is the first of many mistakes you've made tonight, Mr. Cross." The outlaws in the pit had fallen silent, listening intently to the exchange. Vera noted how the 3 men still positioned with Cross had drawn closer together, instinctively seeking mutual protection as they realized the extent of their tactical disadvantage. "Who are you really?" Cross demanded, the pretense of polite negotiation abandoned. Vera's reply was measured, calculated to unsettle rather than inform. "Someone who anticipated your arrival weeks ago, when you first began asking questions about copper deposits in Deadfall Valley." This confirmation of his true objective visibly impacted Cross, even in the dim light. He stepped back involuntarily, reassessing both Vera and his own compromised position. "The northern ridge is rigged with deadfalls," she continued calmly. "The eastern approach contains 3 separate snare systems. The western path has a pitfalls, similar to the one currently holding 3 of your men. And the southern trail, which appears most inviting, is prepared to collapse the entire ravine with a single trigger mechanism." Through her mirror, Vera watched. Tension rippled through Cross's remaining men. One muttered something urgently to his leader, clearly advocating for withdrawal. Cross silenced him with a sharp gesture, his mind visibly working through this radical shift in tactical reality. "You've turned this entire valley into a defensive position," he observed, grudging admiration mixing with frustration. "Every approach, every clearing, every apparent safe passage," Vera confirmed. 3 years of methodical preparation ensures that no one takes what's mine through force or intimidation. As darkness settled fully over the confrontation, Vera detected a subtle shift in Cross's demeanor. The initial shock was passing, replaced by the calculated assessment of a veteran tactician. He was adapting, reconsidering his options, formulating a new approach to this unexpected challenge. The most dangerous moment was approaching, the point at which a skilled adversary transitions from surprise to decisive action. "Something doesn't feel right," whispered Garrett, Cross's newest recruit, as he pressed himself against the gnarled trunk of a ponderosa pine. "Military-grade traps around a widow's cabin? We should pull back, rethink this." The shadow beside him, Harlan Wade, Cross's second-in-command, spat on the frozen ground. "You heard the boss. We ain't leaving without the land claim. Woman's got copper worth 50,000 under her floorboards." The standoff had reached its first critical juncture. Vera surveyed the situation through her elaborate mirror network while loading specialized ammunition into her Winchester. The rounds, her own creation, contained reduced powder charges and specially shaped projectiles designed to incapacitate rather than kill. 15 years in the Apache campaigns had taught her that death should never be the first option, merely the final one. "Mrs. Donovan." Cross projected his voice across the clearing, abandoning stealth now that his men's positions had been compromised. I admire your preparations, but you're still outnumbered. My men are growing impatient. Perhaps we should discuss a financial arrangement that would benefit us both. Vera positioned herself by the north window, keeping her body angled away from the opening. Your financial arrangements with the Diablo Canyon homesteaders ended with 3 graves and a burned-out settlement, Mr. Cross. Forgive me if I find your negotiation tactics suspect. A tense silence followed her words. She watched through her mirrors as Cross's expression hardened, the veneer of civility cracking to reveal the predator beneath. You're well informed for someone so isolated, he called back, genuine curiosity mixing with caution. Makes me wonder who exactly I'm dealing with. Instead of responding, Vera reached beneath her table and pulled a slender cord. A mechanism engaged with a barely audible click. 300 yards away, at the edge of her property, a series of coal oil lamps ignited sequentially, illuminating the northern ridgeline where 2 of Cross's men had positioned themselves for sniper coverage. The sudden light transformed them. From hidden threats to exposed targets, Vera's Winchester cracked once, the specialized round striking the rock face 6 inches from the nearest outlaw's head. The man dove for cover, cursing as stone fragments peppered his face. That's your second warning, Vera projected, her voice carrying the calm authority that had once commanded army scouts across hostile territory. The next one won't miss. Through her observation system, she watched Cross signaling urgently to his remaining men, directing them to fall back to less exposed positions. The disciplined response confirmed her assessment. These weren't common bandits, but trained men following a competent leader. You shoot like military, Cross called out, his tone revealing newfound respect. No civilian woman places a shot that precise in this light. Vera moved to another position, maintaining her tactical advantage through mobility. You're operating on faulty intelligence, Mr. Cross. I suggest you withdraw while that option remains available. A bitter laugh carried across the clearing. Copper Ridge Mining doesn't accept failure, ma'am. They've invested too much in acquiring this valley. If my crew doesn't secure this claim, they'll just send another. And the next bunch won't be as civilized as we are. Vera's eyes narrowed at the mention of Copper Ridge Mining. The name connected several pieces of intelligence she'd gathered over recent months. The mysterious company purchasing homesteads across 3 territories, always targeting properties with mineral deposits, always employing former military men as negotiators. Copper Ridge, she said, maintaining her vigilant surveillance of Cross's positions. Owned by Senator William Drummond through a series of shell companies, the same senator who blocked army investigations into attacks on homesteaders last spring. The shocked silence that followed her statement confirmed she'd struck a nerve. Through her mirrors, she watched Cross exchange surprised glances with Wade, clearly unsettled by her knowledge of their employer's true identity. You've been busy. For a recluse, Cross finally responded, wariness now evident in his voice. The senator wouldn't appreciate having his business arrangements discussed so openly. And the territorial governor wouldn't appreciate learning that a sitting senator is orchestrating attacks on legal homesteads, Vera countered smoothly. I've documented every acquisition, every assault, every accident that befell those who refused to sell. The evidence is already in the hands of 3 separate attorneys, with instructions to forward it to federal marshals in the event of my untimely death. This revelation landed like a physical blow among the outlaws. Vera observed their body language through her mirrors, the uncertain glances, the subtle shifting of weight as they reconsidered their commitment to this increasingly complicated operation. Another pressure plate activated at the western perimeter, sending a barely perceptible vibration through the floorboards beneath Vera's feet. Someone was testing a different approach, likely hoping her attention remained focused on Cross and the northern positions. Without appearing to notice, Vera moved to her western observation post, using the specialized mirrored apparatus to identify two figures creeping along what appeared to be a game trail, but was actually one of her carefully constructed false approaches. The men moved with exaggerated caution, visibly checking for tripwires as they advanced, looking for the obvious, while missing the actual threat beneath their feet. The first outlaw reached the critical trigger point, a pressure-sensitive plate disguised as an ordinary patch of frozen ground. The mechanism activated with a soft click that wouldn't have been audible to the advancing men. Vera counted silently, 3, 2, 1, then watched as the ground gave way beneath them. Both men dropped into a concealed pit with a surprised shout cut short as they landed on the cushioning layers of pine boughs she'd placed to prevent serious injury. "Peterson and Larkin are down," Wade hissed across, eyes darting nervously toward the western approach. "Some kind of pit trap. That's 5 men incapacitated, and we haven't even reached the cabin." Cross's jaw tightened as he reassessed their deteriorating tactical position. His 7-man operation had been reduced to just himself and 2 others. In less than an hour, without his target firing a single lethal shot. Whoever this widow was, she operated with a level of tactical sophistication that rivaled his own military training. "Mrs. Donovan," he called, his voice now carrying the formal tone of a military man addressing a worthy opponent. "You've demonstrated your tactical advantages convincingly. I propose terms for disengagement." Vera moved to a position where she could respond while maintaining her defensive coverage. "I'm listening, Mr. Cross, though your terms are largely irrelevant at this point. My men will withdraw, and I'll personally ensure Copper Ridge Mining understands this property is not available at any price," Cross offered. "In exchange, I ask only for the release of my captured men and your discretion regarding Senator Drummond's involvement." Vera considered his proposal carefully, assessing both his sincerity and the tactical realities. 5 of his men were effectively neutralized, contained in various traps around her property. The remaining 2 looked increasingly uncertain about their mission. Cross himself had maintained his composure, adapting to each setback with the resourcefulness of a trained scout, the most dangerous kind of adversary. "Your proposal is incomplete," she responded finally. "It addresses immediate disengagement, but not future security. What prevents Copper Ridge from simply sending another crew once you've departed?" Cross's silhouette straightened as he considered her point. "A fair concern. What assurance would satisfy you?" "Documentation," Vera stated firmly. "Written orders from Copper Ridge Mining connecting them to your activities with the Senator's seal or signature if available. Provide this and I'll consider our immediate conflict resolved." A tense silence followed her counter-proposal. Vera watched Cross through her mirrors, noting the subtle indicators of internal conflict. The slight tightening around his eyes, the momentary clenching of his jaw as he weighed loyalty against survival. "You're asking me to betray my employer," he said finally. "I'm offering you a way to ensure your employer can't sacrifice you when this operation fails," Vera corrected. "Senator Drummond has abandoned 3 previous teams when they became liabilities. The Garrison brothers were found hanging from a cottonwood outside Silver Creek last autumn, officially ruled suicide, though few men managed to tie their own hands before hanging themselves. This information visibly unsettled Cross's remaining men. Wade stepped closer to his leader, speaking urgently in lowered tones. Through her acoustic enhancements, specially designed sound-gathering funnels concealed in the cabin's exterior, Vera caught fragments of their heated exchange. "Can't trust Drummond. Need insurance. Already dead men if—" Vera allowed them their deliberation, using the moment to check on her various containment systems. The 3 men in the pit trap were attempting to scale its walls without success, the carefully angled sides preventing effective climbing. The man suspended in her snare had given up his struggles, hanging limply as he awaited his fate. The fifth captured outlaw remained in the collapsed tunnel section near her eastern boundary, effectively pinned until she chose to release him. Cross turned back toward the cabin. Decision apparently reached. I have documentation in my saddlebags, written orders from Copper Ridge, signed by their legal representative, not the senator directly, but a clear chain leading back to him with proper investigation. A reasonable start, Vera acknowledged. Have Wade retrieve it, slowly with his hands visible. Cross nodded to his lieutenant, who moved with exaggerated caution toward the horses tethered at the edge of the clearing. Every line of Wade's body communicated his awareness that he was being watched through multiple sight lines, any sudden movement potentially triggering either mechanical defenses or a well-placed shot from the cabin. While Wade retrieved the documentation, Vera addressed the remaining tactical situation. Your men in the pit trap will remain contained until dawn. The suspension snare will release automatically in 4 hours. The man in the eastern tunnel has access to water and sufficient air. He'll be uncomfortable but unharmed until I trigger the release mechanism. Cross processed this information with professional assessment. You designed your defensive systems for temporary containment rather than elimination, unusual for frontier justice. Death is permanent, Vera replied simply. It eliminates future options and creates new enemies. Temporary containment provides time for better solutions to emerge. Wade returned with a leather document case, holding it up for inspection. Orders and payment schedules, as discussed. Place it on the stump beside the water trough and step back, Vera directed. When he had complied, she continued, Now, all of you will withdraw beyond my northern boundary marker. Once I've verified the documentation, I'll signal with a lantern. That will be your confirmation that our immediate business is concluded. Cross studied the cabin for a long moment, clearly trying to discern her position within the darkened interior. You've outmaneuvered us completely, Mrs. Donovan. A remarkable tactical achievement for anyone, let alone a widow. Vera finished for him, a note of dry amusement entering her voice for the first time. Your assessment parameters were flawed from the beginning, Mr. Cross. Gender and marital status are poor indicators of tactical capability. A rueful smile crossed Cross's face as he signaled his remaining men to begin their withdrawal. A lesson my military instructors attempted to impart, though it seems I required a more direct demonstration. Vera maintained her vigilant observation as the 3 remaining outlaws retreated toward their northern positions, keeping their movements deliberate and non-threatening. Only when they had passed beyond her outer perimeter markers did she move, to retrieve the document case, using a specialized pole with a grasping mechanism that allowed her to collect it without exposing herself to potential fire. Inside the leather case, she found exactly what Cross had described, written orders from Copper Ridge Mining Company directing him to secure the Deadfall Valley property through any means necessary, with particular emphasis on ensuring no competing claims can be filed. The document included payment schedules, bonuses for quick acquisition, and veiled references to eliminating complications that arose during negotiations. Most importantly, it bore the signature of Judge Hammond Fletcher, Senator Drummond's known associate and legal proxy. Vera checked the documents carefully for authenticity, assessing the paper quality, ink consistency, and signature characteristics. Satisfied that they were genuine, she secured them in her hidden floor safe alongside her existing evidence against Copper Ridge's operations. Moving to the front window, she lit a lantern and placed it on the sill, the agreed-upon signal that she had verified the documentation and considered their immediate conflict resolved. Through her mirrors, she watched as Cross raised a hand in acknowledgement before leading his 2 remaining men toward their horses. presumably to begin making arrangements for the release of their captured companions in the morning. As their silhouettes disappeared into the darkness, Vera allowed herself a moment of reflection. The confrontation had unfolded largely as she had anticipated based on Cross's military background, though his willingness to provide documentation suggested a man who valued survival over blind loyalty, an unexpected quality in someone with his reputation for ruthless efficiency. The real challenge would begin tomorrow, when she would need to decide how to leverage this new evidence against Senator Drummond and Copper Ridge Mining. Simply adding it to her existing documentation would strengthen her position, but wouldn't necessarily prevent future attempts on her property. The conflict had shifted from tactical to strategic, her specialty during her years advising Territorial Command on Apache containment. Moving methodically through her cabin, Vera checked each defensive system, resetting triggers and adjusting mechanisms that had been activated during the confrontation. The complex network of tripwires, pressure plates and containment devices had performed precisely as designed, validating years of careful planning and installation. As she worked, her thoughts turned to Deputy Clark in Copper Springs. The young lawman had proven himself observant and discretionary, qualities that might make him a valuable ally in the coming strategic conflict with Senator Drummond. The evidence she'd gathered, combined with Cross's documentation, would require careful handling through proper legal channels if it were to have any meaningful impact. A faint noise from the pit trap drew her attention. The captured outlaws, attempting once again to scale its walls. Through a specialized listening tube connected to each of her containment systems, she heard their frustrated conversation. Ain't natural the way she had everything prepared, like she knew exactly where we'd step. Military training, gotta be. Vera smiled thinly as she continued her preparations for the night. Their confusion was understandable. Few people, especially men like these, expected to encounter sophisticated defensive tactics from a homesteading widow. That fundamental underestimation had been her greatest advantage throughout her military career and continued to serve her well in civilian life. As midnight approached, Vera completed her security checks and allowed herself a small measure of satisfaction. The initial confrontation had been resolved without bloodshed. 5 of Cross's 7 men were contained in various traps around her property, and she had acquired valuable documentation connecting Senator Drummond to the illegal seizure of homesteads throughout the territory, a successful operation by any military standard. But as Lieutenant Nightshade Monroe had learned, through 15 years of frontier combat, initial victories often gave rise to more complex conflicts. Senator Drummond would not abandon his pursuit of the copper deposits beneath Deadfall Valley simply because one team had failed to secure them. When he learned of Cross's compromise, his response would likely involve more direct and dangerous measures. Vera moved to her strategic planning table, unrolling a detailed map of the surrounding territory. The time had come to shift from defensive to offensive operations, to take the fight to Copper Ridge Mining before they could regroup and launch another assault on her homestead. For that, she would need allies, intelligence, and perfect timing. The real battle was just beginning. The sunrise painted Deadfall Valley in hues of amber and gold as Vera released the last of Cross's men from their containment. The outlaw stumbled away from the collapsed tunnel entrance, rubbing circulation back into his cramped limbs while eyeing Vera with a mixture of fear and begrudging respect. "You ever kill anyone with these contraptions?" he asked, gesturing to the complex mechanism that had held him prisoner through the night. Vera's mismatched eyes revealed nothing as she secured the release lever. "They're designed for containment, not elimination, though I can adjust that parameter when necessary." The man shuddered visibly at her clinical tone. He hurried to join his companions, who stood in a sullen cluster near their horses under Cross's watchful supervision. The 7 outlaws who had arrived with such confidence the previous day now appeared diminished, their pride wounded more severely than their bodies. Cross approached Vera, maintaining a respectful distance. The morning light revealed details obscured by darkness, the precision-tooled mechanisms visible along her property's perimeter, the careful engineering that had transformed a frontier homestead into an elaborate defensive position. His professional assessment was evident in his gaze as it swept across her preparations. "You have my word they'll trouble you no further," he said, gesturing toward his men. "And I'll personally ensure Senator Drummond understands the complications involved in pursuing this property." Vera noted the careful ambiguity in his statement. Complications could mean her defensive preparations or the evidence she'd acquired. Either way, Cross was positioning himself with political caution. "The documentation you provided alters the strategic landscape," she replied. "My intention isn't to create unnecessary enemies, Mr. Cross, simply to ensure my property rights are respected." Cross studied her with newfound curiosity. "You speak like a military officer discussing territorial negotiations. Increasingly, I find myself wondering who Vera Donovan really is." Instead of answering, Vera handed him a small leather pouch. "Medicine for your men. The one suspended in the snare will experience shoulder stiffness. This will help." Cross accepted the unexpected offering with surprise. "Generous, considering our purpose here." They were following orders, Vera replied simply. "And men are not expendable resources, despite what employers like Drummond might believe." As Cross mounted his horse to lead his chastened crew away from Deadfall Valley, he paused for a final assessment. "Whatever your past, Mrs. Donovan, you've earned my professional respect. Few opponents have outmaneuvered me so thoroughly." Vera watched them depart with the vigilant patience that had kept her alive through 15 years of frontier warfare. Only when they had disappeared beyond the northern ridge did she return to her cabin to implement the next phase of her strategy. Tactical victory over Cross's team had been necessary but insufficient. Senator Drummond wouldn't abandon his pursuit of the copper deposits beneath her land. Men of his ambition viewed setbacks merely as data points requiring adjusted approaches. His next move would likely involve more sophisticated methods than direct confrontation. Vera changed from her homesteader's clothing into riding attire, sturdy canvas trousers, a fitted jacket with reinforced leather patches, and high boots designed for both protection and mobility. The outfit had raised eyebrows during her infrequent visits to Copper Springs, but frontier pragmatism generally outweighed social conventions in the territories. Before departing, she secured her property with secondary defensive measures, simpler mechanisms designed to alert rather than capture, providing early warning of any approach during her absence. The most crucial evidence remained locked in her floor safe, while copies were distributed to 3 separate locations, each accessible only with specialized knowledge of her coding systems. Vera selected her most reliable horse, a dappled grey, gelding named Ghost, with remarkable endurance and the rare quality of absolute silence on command. As she rode toward Copper Springs, her mind methodically sorted through potential allies and adversaries in the coming conflict. Deputy Clark was young but observant, with an evident sense of justice that transcended the frontier's usual pragmatic corruption. Marshal Hollister remained an unknown quantity. His warnings about Cross suggested concern for her safety, but many territorial lawmen maintained complex relationships with mining interests. The 15-mile journey gave Vera time to refine her approach. Direct confrontation with Drummond would be futile. Senators operated through layers of proxies and legal barriers. The key would be severing his connection to Copper Ridge mining through documented evidence of illegal activities specific enough to overcome political protection. Copper Springs had grown visibly, even in the 2 weeks since her last visit. New construction dotted the main street, a hardware emporium, an expanded hotel, and the framework of what appeared to be a proper courthouse. The telltale signs of mining prosperity were everywhere, from the quality of horses hitched outside. The saloon to the Eastern fashions displayed in the mercantile's windows. Vera approached with tactical awareness, noting the unusual number of armed men loitering along the boardwalks. Not Cross's crew. These men displayed the professional alertness of hired guns rather than outlaws, with matching gun belts and the coordinated positioning of men sharing a common employer. She tethered Ghost behind Weber's general store rather than at the public hitching post, approaching the town's center via the alley network. Her military training asserted itself automatically. Identify potential adversaries, establish covered approaches, maintain awareness of exit routes. The general store provided her first intelligence opportunity. Mrs. Weber, a formidable widow, with unparalleled knowledge of local affairs, greeted Vera with genuine warmth that transcended frontier politeness. "Mrs. Donovan, we weren't expecting you until the monthly supply run." She lowered her voice as she wrapped Vera's small purchase of coffee. "Though perhaps it's fortunate you've come. There's been men asking after you, not the usual sort." Vera arranged her face in a mask of mild concern. "What sort of men, Mrs. Weber? Not those troublemakers Deputy Clark mentioned." "Different ones," Mrs. Weber replied, leaning closer. "Professional types with city clothes and clean fingernails, asking about property documents and territorial claims. And there's a special agent arrived on yesterday's stage. Says he's from the Department of the Interior, but spends mighty long hours with Judge McAllister and those mining fellows." Vera processed this intelligence with outward calm. A federal agent suggested escalation beyond Cross's failed operation. Drummond was deploying more sophisticated resources. "Any sign of Marshal Hollister?" she inquired casually. Mrs. Weber's expression darkened. "Rode out 3 days ago to investigate reports of claim jumping near Silver Ridge. Convenient timing, some might say, with all these new interests arriving in his absence." As Vera departed the store, Deputy Clark intercepted her near the alley entrance, his youthful face etched with concern. "Mrs. Donovan," he said quietly, tipping his hat with formal courtesy while maneuvering to shield their conversation from observers across the street, "was coming to send a rider to your place. There's been developments you should know about." They walked together toward the jail, maintaining the appearance of casual conversation while Clark briefed her in hushed tones. "Judge McAllister received documents yesterday claiming your homestead was improperly registered. Something about missing validation stamps from the Territorial Land Office. There's talk of invalidating your claim." Vera absorbed this information without visible reaction, though her mind rapidly assessed its implications. Legal maneuvering meant Drummond was pursuing both legitimate and illegitimate channels simultaneously, a sophisticated approach suggesting resources beyond ordinary mining interests. "The documents are forgeries," she stated with quiet certainty. "My claim bears proper validation from Territorial Governor Larson himself, with documentation duplicated in Denver and Washington." Clark nodded, relief briefly crossing his features. "That's what I figured, but the judge seems mighty persuaded by these new papers. And there's something else. Marshal Hollister's deputy from Silver City arrived this morning. Says the marshal never reached Silver Ridge. His horse returned riderless 2 days ago. This development shifted the strategic landscape significantly. Marshal Hollister's absence, potentially permanent, removed a critical legal authority who might have verified Vera's territorial claims against Drummond's forgeries. "Who's acting marshal in his absence?" Vera asked, though she suspected the answer. Clark's expression confirmed her concern. Judge McAllister appointed Maxwell Turner, foreman from the Copper Ridge operations south of town. They reached the Jailhouse, a sturdy log structure with barred windows and a newly painted sign declaring it the Territorial Justice Office. Inside, Clark retrieved a folder from beneath a loose floorboard in the marshal's office. "Hollister left this for you," he said, handing over a sealed envelope. "Said if anything happened to him, or if claimed troubles started with your property, I should make sure you got it personally." Vera broke the seal and scanned the contents, her expression unchanging despite the significant intelligence contained. Within, Marshal Hollister had compiled documentation on Copper Ridge Mining's operations throughout the territory, claim records, witness statements, and a detailed accounting of properties seized through dubious legal proceedings or outright violence. Most importantly, he'd included a sworn affidavit connecting Senator Drummond directly to the operations, along with copies of telegraph transcripts ordering the removal of obstacles to various acquisitions. The marshal suspected something like this might happen, Clark explained, keeping his voice low despite the empty jailhouse. "Been gathering evidence for months. Said you'd know what to do with it if things went sideways." Vera carefully returned the documents to their envelope. "Marshal Hollister was more perceptive than I realized. These records substantially reinforce existing evidence against Drummond and Copper Ridge." Clark's eyes widened slightly. "You've been building a case too?" "Let's say I recognize patterns," Vera replied, her mismatched eyes scanning the street through the jailhouse window. "The approach to my property yesterday wasn't their first attempt at acquisition through intimidation." She briefed Clark on Cross's nighttime operation and its outcome, omitting specific details about her defensive measures while emphasizing the documentation she'd acquired linking Cross to Copper Ridge and potentially to Drummond himself. Clark whistled softly. 7 men against 1 widow, and you sent them packing without firing a shot? Folks in town spun tales about your independence, Mrs. Donovan, but that's something beyond ordinary grit. Preparation compensates for numerical disadvantage, Vera stated matter-of-factly, though I suspect Drummond's legal maneuvers may prove more challenging than direct confrontation. Their conversation was interrupted by the jailhouse door swinging open. A tall man in an immaculate Eastern suit entered, flanked by 2 of the armed men Vera had noted earlier. His precisely trimmed beard and gold-rimmed spectacles marked him as distinctly out of place in the frontier settlement. "Deputy Clark," he announced, his cultured voice carrying the practiced authority of government service. "I require access to the territorial claim records. Judge McAllister has authorized a complete review of all registrations within 50 miles of Copper Springs." Clark straightened, his hand instinctively moving toward his sidearm before settling at his belt. "Those records are sealed under Marshal Hollister's authority, Mr. Lawrence. Can't be accessed without his direct approval or territorial court order." Lawrence smiled thinly, producing a document from his breast pocket. "As Special Agent for the Department of the Interior, I have authorization superseding local territorial restrictions. The judge has countersigned the order." Vera observed the exchange with outward calm, though her tactical assessment noted the positioning of Lawrence's armed escorts, one blocking the main entrance, the other angled to cover the rear door. Professional placement suggesting military or federal training. "Mrs. Donovan," Lawrence said, turning his attention to her with calculated surprise. "What a fortuitous encounter. I was planning to visit your property tomorrow regarding certain irregularities in your claim registration. My registration is properly documented through Governor Larson's office," Vera replied evenly. "With verification records in Denver and Washington." Lawrence's expression remained pleasant, though his eyes hardened. "Yes, those are precisely the documents under review. Certain authentication stamps appear questionable. A common problem with frontier filings, I'm afraid. Fortunately, such matters can often be resolved through reasonable accommodation with appropriate commercial interests." The threat beneath his polite phrasing was unmistakable. Surrender the property to Copper Ridge or face legal invalidation of her claim through manufactured evidence. I look forward to reviewing any concerns with your documentation, Vera responded, matching his formal tone. Though I should note that all my territorial transactions were witnessed by federal representatives, including correspondence with Secretary Chandler regarding mineral rights provisions. The reference to the Secretary of the Interior, Lawrence's ostensible superior, caused a momentary flicker of uncertainty in his composed facade. Vera had deliberately mentioned Chandler to test Lawrence's reaction, confirming her suspicion that his credentials might not withstand rigorous verification. Yes, well, Lawrence recovered smoothly. These matters will be thoroughly examined. Deputy Clerk, the records, if you please. Clark hesitated, clearly torn between lawful procedure and the apparent authority of Lawrence's documentation. Vera provided the opening he needed. I believe I've taken enough of the deputy's time, she said, moving toward the door. Good day, gentlemen. As she passed Lawrence, she noted every detail of his documentation, the paper quality, ink characteristics, and most tellingly, the territorial seal, which displayed subtle differences from the authentic version she'd studied extensively during her military service, validating land treaties. Outside, Vera moved with purposeful calm toward the telegraph office. Lawrence's appearance confirmed that Drummond was escalating beyond simple intimidation tactics. The focus on land records suggested a coordinated legal strategy to undermine legitimate claims throughout the region, exactly the pattern Hollister had documented in his evidence. The telegraph operator, a wizened man named Harper, with a known fondness for whiskey and loose lips, provided her next intelligence opportunity. Need to send confirmation of supply delivery to my Eastern associates, Vera explained, sliding across a carefully worded message along with payment twice the normal rate. Harper's eyebrows rose at the generous compensation. Happy to help, Mrs. Donovan. Though the lines have been mighty busy these past few days, all sorts of official business taking priority. Official business? Vera inquired casually. Government dispatches, Harper confirmed, lowering his voice. Conspiratorially. Fellow named Lawrence sends daily reports to Denver and Washington. Very particular about privacy too. Stands right here watching while I transmit. As Harper turned to his equipment, Vera observed a stack of transmission records partially visible beneath his ledger. With practiced sleight of hand, a skill developed during covert document acquisition behind enemy lines, she shifted the papers enough to glimpse several messages, noting key phrases about claim verification and expedited transfers. Most significantly, she caught a dispatch signature not to the Department of Interior, but to an address in Georgetown, Senator Drummond's Washington residence. Vera departed the telegraph office with crucial confirmation. Lawrence was almost certainly Drummond's direct agent rather than a legitimate federal representative. The coordinated effort to invalidate territorial claims pointed toward a massive land seizure scheme far beyond her individual property. As Vera retrieved Ghost from behind Weber's store, she formulated her counter-strategy. Direct confrontation with Lawrence would be premature without establishing a stronger legal position. The combined evidence from her own documentation, Cross's papers, and Marshal Hollister's files would need to reach legitimate federal authorities. But Copper Ridge clearly controlled local communications. The strategic landscape had evolved beyond defense of her homestead to a broader conflict over territorial governance and mineral rights. Lawrence's presence and Hollister's disappearance indicated that Drummond was prepared to eliminate any obstacle to his acquisition plans. Vera mounted Ghost and departed Copper Springs via the Southern Trail, deliberately visible to Lawrence's men who had now positioned themselves strategically throughout the town. Let them believe she was returning directly to her homestead. It would focus their attention in the wrong direction for what she planned next. A mile outside town, she guided Ghost off the main trail into a densely wooded ravine, then doubled, back using the concealment techniques she'd perfected during her years scouting Apache territory. Within an hour, she had circled completely around Copper Springs and was heading west on the Denver Road, the opposite direction from her homestead. The true battle for Deadfall Valley would not be won with defensive traps or even documented evidence. It would require bringing Drummond's entire operation into the light through channels beyond his influence, and Vera knew exactly who could help her accomplish that. Former Lieutenant Colonel James Harker, her commanding officer during the Apache campaigns, now served as federal circuit judge based in Sacramento. More importantly, he operated independently of territorial politics and had the authority to initiate federal investigations beyond Drummond's reach. Ghost maintained a ground-covering trot as Vera calculated the journey ahead. 3 days to reach the telegraph station at Fort Bridger, beyond Drummond's immediate influence. From there, a secure message to Harker could set events in motion that would unravel the senator's entire operation. As twilight approached, Vera allowed herself a grim smile. Drummond and his agents believed they were dealing with an isolated widow defending a single homestead. They would soon discover they had provoked a strategic confrontation with an opponent trained in territorial warfare, and one who never entered battle without mapping all possible outcomes. The senator had sought to claim her land, but had unwittingly triggered a campaign that would ultimately cost him far more than copper deposits. Vera adjusted her course by the North Star and pressed forward into the gathering darkness, Ghost's hoofbeats fading into the night as they carried the seeds of Drummond's destruction westward. The Fort Bridger telegraph office hummed with activity as Vera completed her carefully coded message to Judge Harker. 3 days of hard riding through harsh terrain had left her trail cold to any potential pursuers, but she maintained the vigilant awareness that had become second nature during her years in military service. "Mighty peculiar message, ma'am," remarked the telegraph operator, a young man with quick eyes and quicker fingers. "Military code?" "Mining surveys," Vera replied smoothly. "Technical specifications require precise language." The explanation satisfied the operator, who couldn't recognize that what appeared to be geological terminology actually contained embedded tactical intelligence on Drummond's operation. Only Harker, who had developed the specialized communication system during Apache campaigns, would recognize its true meaning. As the machine clattered her message westward, Vera considered her next move. Drummond would discover her absence from Deadfall Valley soon, if he hadn't already. Lawrence would likely interpret her disappearance as retreat rather than offensive maneuver, a misperception she intended to exploit fully. "Telegraph came for you yesterday," the operator mentioned, retrieving a sealed message from a cubbyhole. "Addressed to Donovan Engineer, which seems specific enough. Hope I haven't overstepped." Vera accepted the unexpected communication with outward calm, though. Her pulse quickened. Few people knew her location. She'd been deliberately circumspect about her destination when leaving Copper Springs. The message, once decoded using the military substitution cipher she shared with only 3 living people, proved surprisingly brief: nightshade, hollow tree, midnight magpie. To anyone else, it would appear nonsensical. To Vera, it conveyed critical intelligence. Nightshade confirmed the message came from her former intelligence network. Hollow tree referred to an abandoned way station 12 miles north. Midnight indicated timing, while magpie identified the sender, her former second-in-command, Captain Samuel Blackwood, who'd earned the nickname for his ability to collect shiny bits of intelligence from seemingly worthless sources. Vera departed Fort Bridger with Ghost at an easy trot, giving no indication of urgency despite the significant development. If Blackwood had tracked her here, others potentially could as well. She took a meandering route from town, doubled back twice to confirm she wasn't followed, then cut cross-country toward the rendezvous point. The abandoned way station materialized. From the darkness like a shipwreck on a prairie sea, a crumbling structure of weathered timber and failing roof, long bypassed by the newer stage routes. Vera approached with tactical caution, securing Ghost in a concealed depression before advancing on foot. The complex series of bird calls that greeted her brought the first genuine smile to her face in days, still using the same signals after. "All these years, Magpie?" she asked, stepping into the shadows of the dilapidated porch. A figure emerged from the darkness, tall, broad-shouldered, with a distinctive eye patch and meticulously waxed moustache that had made Captain Samuel Blackwood instantly recognizable to both allies and enemies during the Apache campaigns. "Some patterns are worth preserving, Nightshade," he replied, extending a hand that she clasped firmly, "especially when they've kept us alive through 3 territories." Inside the station's single remaining room, illuminated by a carefully shielded lantern, Blackwood had established a military-grade field position, maps secured to the walls, communications equipment arranged on a portable desk, weapons positioned for immediate access. "Not the retirement I imagined for you," Vera observed, surveying the operation with professional assessment. "Private investigator for the Pinkerton Agency? Or have you maintained your military connections?" Blackwood's single eye crinkled with amusement. "Both, actually. Officially, I consult on territorial security for railroad interests. Unofficially, I've been tracking a pattern of claim manipulations across 3 territories, a pattern that led me straight to your doorstep, Lieutenant." Monroe, Vera felt no surprise at his use of her military designation. Blackwood had been her most trusted operative during the campaigns, the one person besides Colonel Harker who knew her true role in intelligence operations too sensitive for official documentation. "Senator Drummond," she stated, rather than asked. Blackwood nodded, turning to a map where red pins marked dozens of locations across the Western Territories. 37 homesteads acquired through dubious circumstances in the past 18 months. 7 homesteaders disappeared, 4 suspicious accidents. All properties subsequently transferred to shell companies controlled by Copper Ridge Mining, which is controlled by Drummond, Vera continued, examining the pattern with tactical assessment, though proving that connection has proven challenging. Until now. Blackwood produced a leather folio containing documents that made Vera's eyebrows rise slightly, the only indication of surprise she allowed herself. Drummond's former secretary reached out to the Pinkertons 3 weeks ago. Apparently, the good senator failed to pay him the promised bonus for certain special administrative services. The documents included private correspondence between Drummond and various operatives, including detailed instructions for claim invalidation, homesteader intimidation, and methods for concealing the connection to Copper Ridge. Most significantly, they contained financial records showing mineral rights transfers from seized properties directly into Drummond's personal holdings. The secretary had a remarkably comprehensive record-keeping habit, Vera observed, studying the damning evidence. "People in service to men like Drummond tend to maintain insurance," Blackwood replied, "though it rarely saves them. The secretary was found floating in the Potomac 2 days after contacting us." Vera processed this information with the detached analysis of a military intelligence officer. Drummond eliminates liabilities efficiently. Cross mentioned similar patterns with previous operatives who failed him. "Speaking of Cross," Blackwood said, producing a telegraph transcript, "he's disappeared, along with his entire crew. Reported heading north from Copper Springs 3 days ago, then vanished completely." This development shifted Vera's tactical assessment significantly. Cross had given his word to withdraw from the conflict, a commitment she had cautiously accepted given his professional background. His disappearance suggested either betrayal or, more concerningly, elimination by Drummond to remove witnesses. "Lawrence?" she inquired, referencing the false federal agent. "Returned to Copper Springs yesterday with a full complement of armed men, professionals, not local talent. They've established checkpoints on all roads leading to Deadfall Valley." Vera's expression remained impassive, though her mind rapidly recalculated strategic variables. "They're preparing for a more direct approach now that legal maneuvering has been complicated." "There's more," Blackwood continued, his tone growing grim. "Marshal Hollister has been found, or rather his body has. Staged to appear like an accident, but with clear signs of execution. And Judge McAllister has officially invalidated all land claims in Deadfall Valley, declaring them open for immediate mineral rights acquisition. The tactical landscape had shifted dramatically. With Hollister eliminated and legal proceedings corrupted, Drummond had created the appearance of legitimacy for what amounted to armed seizure of her property. "What's your stake in this, Magpie?" Vera asked, studying her former second-in-command with assessing eyes. "Pinkerton investigations typically follow the money rather than justice." Blackwood's scarred face hardened. "Hollister was under contract with the Territorial Governor's Office, which retains Pinkerton's services. His murder makes this official business, but personally..." He gestured to the map with its dozens of marked properties. These were American homesteaders, families, veterans, people we were supposed to be protecting when we wore the uniform. Vera nodded, accepting his motivation without further question. Their shared military background made certain values implicit rather than requiring explanation. "You've contacted Harker?" Blackwood asked. "Just now, from Fort Bridger. His judicial authority can initiate federal investigation beyond Drummond's influence, but bureaucracy moves slowly. Lawrence and his men won't wait for judicial process before moving on my property." Blackwood studied the map, his tactical mind visibly calculating distances and timeframes. Based on their checkpoint placements, they're planning to move within 48 hours, too soon for Harker to mobilize federal marshals from Sacramento. Vera unrolled her own map of Deadfall Valley, revealing the detailed defensive preparations she'd documented. "They'll expect my property to be defended as it was against Cross, with mechanical traps and containment systems. Those preparations remain active, but won't be sufficient against a larger force with proper military approach tactics." You're outnumbered at least 20 to 1, Blackwood observed, "and while your reputation for defensive ingenuity is well earned, these aren't untrained bandits. Lawrence has hired former military men, scouts, sappers, experienced fighters." Vera's mismatched eyes revealed a cold calculation that Blackwood recognized from their campaigns together, the look that had earned her the Nightshade designation. Among nervous commanding officers who found her methods effective but unsettling, "They're expecting to find a defensive position," she stated. "We'll give them an offensive one instead." Blackwood's weathered face broke into a grim smile. "Just like Chiricahua Pass, baited ambush? With modifications appropriate to the terrain," Vera confirmed. "I'll need your men. 6 Pinkerton agents, all former military, already positioned as mineral surveyors examining claims north of Copper Springs." Vera nodded, making rapid adjustments to her tactical plan. "Lawrence expects to find me barricaded in my cabin. Instead, he'll find himself caught between multiple force positions while attempting to secure an empty objective." "And Drummond?" Blackwood asked. "Even with successful tactical engagement against Lawrence, the senator remains protected by political position." Vera indicated the documents Blackwood had acquired. Combined with Cross's written orders, Marshal Hollister's evidence, and my own documentation, these create an irrefutable case. If Lawrence's operation fails spectacularly enough, Drummond will be forced to disavow all connection, which contradicts the paper trail we've assembled. As they finalized their strategy well into the night, plotting approach vectors and communication signals, Vera felt the familiar cold focus that had characterized her military operations, the clarity that came with commitment to a decisive engagement. Dawn movement, she confirmed, rolling the maps with precise movements. Converge on Copper Springs from multiple approaches. Your men take outer containment positions to prevent reinforcement or retreat. Primary target is Lawrence, his. Capture and the documentation he carries will complete the evidence chain. Blackwood nodded, checking his timepiece. 10 hours to position, like old times, Nightshade. With one significant difference, Vera replied, her voice carrying a steel edge that had once made even hardened scouts straighten their posture. During the campaigns, we operated under military restrictions against certain tactics. This time, we're facing criminals who've murdered a federal marshal and numerous homesteaders. Her expression remained perfectly controlled, but Blackwood recognized the deadly intent behind her calm exterior. Senator Drummond had made a catastrophic error in targeting Vera Donovan's homestead. He had awakened Lieutenant Nightshade, Monroe, from retirement, and was about to discover why she had been both the most valued and most feared intelligence operative in the Western Territories. The final confrontation was approaching, and this time Vera would not be fighting from a defensive position. She would be bringing the battle directly to her enemies with the precision and devastating effectiveness that had once made her name a whispered warning among those who opposed federal forces on the frontier. Ghost's saddle creaked softly as she mounted, heading into the darkness to begin positioning for the coming engagement. Behind her, Blackwood and his men prepared to execute the most ambitious operation they'd undertaken since the Apache campaigns. Dawn would find Lawrence and his men facing not a solitary widow defending her homestead, but a coordinated military operation led by one of the most tactically innovative officers to serve in the Western Territories. The false dawn cast Copper Springs in shades of grey as Lawrence assembled his men in the livery stable, their breath forming clouds in the winter air. 20 seasoned fighters, former soldiers, scouts and mercenaries, each chosen for experience in territorial enforcement operations. The approach will follow standard military protocol, Lawrence instructed, indicating positions on a roughly drawn map of Deadfall Valley. Teams of 4, converging from multiple vectors. Donovan's traps are concentrated on the established trails, so we'll create new approach paths. Henderson's sappers will neutralize any defensive measures encountered. A bearded man near the back, one of Lawrence's trusted lieutenants, raised a practical concern. What about the widow herself? Cross's men said she has military training. Lawrence's lips curled in derision. Whatever skills she possesses are irrelevant against our numbers. If she surrenders, secure her for transport to Denver. If she resists, he made a dismissive gesture. Accidents happen in claim disputes. Senator Drummond expects this matter resolved permanently by sundown. None of the men noticed the shadow that detached itself from the hayloft above them, slipping silently through the rear window as Lawrence continued detailing their assault plan. Deputy Clark moved with practiced stealth, keeping to the deeper shadows as he worked his way toward the prearranged meeting point behind the abandoned tannery. Vera waited in perfect stillness, Ghost's reins loose in her hand. The mismatched eyes that had unnerved so many opponents during her military career now studied Clark's approach with analytical patience. "They're moving at first light," the deputy reported, his youthful face hardened by recent events. 20 men. Military. Formation. Multiple approach vectors. Lawrence mentioned Drummond directly, said the senator wants permanent resolution by day's end. Vera nodded, this intelligence confirming her tactical assessment. "And the town?" "Most folks locked up tight after yesterday's shooting at the Mercantile. Those who spoke against Judge McAllister's land, ruling either left town or found reasons to stay indoors. Blackwood's men. In position, 3 at the northern ridge wearing surveyor's gear, 2 embedded with the stable hands, 1 posing as a drummer at the hotel. Vera handed Clark a sealed document case. These need to reach the territorial governor's office in Denver. Witness statements, property documentation, and evidence linking Drummond to Marshall Hollister's murder. Clark accepted the case with solemn responsibility. I'll take the south route at first light. Lawrence's checkpoints are all focused on approaches to Deadfall Valley. One more thing, Vera added, her voice taking on the quiet authority that had once commanded military intelligence units. If we don't succeed here, you're the last remaining witness with direct knowledge of Drummond's operation. The documentation will need your testimony to carry full weight. The young deputy straightened, understanding the implications of her warning. I won't fail you, Mrs. Donovan. Lieutenant, she corrected softly, Lieutenant Monroe. It seems I've returned to active service, at least for today. As Clark departed to prepare for his critical mission, Vera mounted Ghost and guided him toward the predetermined command position on a rocky outcropping overlooking both Copper Springs and the road to Deadfall Valley. There, she would coordinate the most challenging operation she'd undertaken since the Apache campaigns. Not a defensive stand against attacking forces, but a precision strike against a numerically superior enemy with political protection. The rising sun painted the landscape in harsh clarity as Lawrence led his mounted force from Copper Springs, their formation displaying the discipline of men with military experience. They moved with the confidence of predators, anticipating easy prey, unaware they were riding into a trap meticulously designed by one of the Army's foremost tactical specialists. From her elevated position, Vera observed their approach through field glasses. Lawrence had divided his force into 5 teams as expected, maintaining communication through signal mirrors as they separated to approach Deadfall Valley from multiple directions. His operational security was professional. Flankers checking, potential ambush positions, scouts ranging ahead to identify terrain features. She activated her own signal mirror, sending a coded flash to Blackwood's position on the opposite ridge. His response confirmed all elements were in position for the coordinated response they had planned through the night. The first phase of their counter-operation unfolded with mathematical precision. As Lawrence's team separated to encircle Deadfall Valley, they encountered no resistance, the expected traps and alarm systems seemingly absent. This apparent lack of defensive preparation accelerated their advance, exactly as Vera had anticipated. 3 miles from her cabin, Lawrence's lead team encountered the first element of her revised strategy, a series of small, controlled rock slides, triggered by Blackwood's men using techniques perfected during Apache campaigns, suddenly blocked the narrow ravine they were traversing. Simultaneously, similar obstructions appeared behind them, effectively isolating 4 of Lawrence's men in a natural containment zone without inflicting casualties. First team contained, came Blackwood's signal flash from the western ridge. Vera acknowledged with a single light reflection before shifting her attention to Lawrence's main force, now responding to the unexpected development with professional concern, but not yet recognizing the larger pattern forming around them. Lawrence dispatched 2 men to investigate the isolated team situation, unwittingly reducing his force, according to Vera's calculated prediction. As these riders navigated a wooded slope, carefully positioned trip lines sent their mounts stumbling, dumping both men unceremoniously into a ravine where 2 of Blackwood's agents waited to secure them. Second team neutralized, flashed the signal from the concealed position. Lawrence, now visibly concerned by the loss of communication with 2 of his teams, consolidated his remaining forces. Exactly the response Vera had predicted based on his military background. Standard tactical doctrine when facing unexpected resistance was to concentrate strength rather than remain divided. This predictable reaction played directly into the next phase of her strategy. As Lawrence's remaining 12 men converged on the main trail, they found it mysteriously clear of the defensive measures Cross had reported. Their caution gradually yielded to accelerated progress as they approached within visual range of Vera's seemingly undefended cabin. Lawrence raised his hand, signaling his men to deploy into standard assault formation. Through her field glasses, Vera observed his confidence returning as he assessed the apparently vulnerable target. The final phase of her counter-strategy activated with brutal efficiency. From concealed positions surrounding the approaching force, Blackwood and his Pinkerton operatives initiated a coordinated response that combined precisely calibrated canyon echoes with strategic firing positions. The effect created the auditory illusion of a much larger opposing force, while projectiles struck the ground near Lawrence's men with alarming accuracy. "Federal marshals, throw down your weapons!" Blackwood's voice boomed through the canyon, amplified by the natural acoustic properties Vera had mapped during her years in the valley. The psychological impact was immediate. Lawrence's men, already unnerved by the unexplained loss of their companions, found themselves apparently surrounded by a substantial federal force. Two immediately dropped their weapons, while others sought cover, returning fire at shadows. Lawrence himself maintained greater composure, organizing a defensive position behind a rocky outcropping while attempting to assess the actual strength of the opposition. His military experience was evident in his methodical response to ambush. Establish defensive position, determine enemy strength, identify withdrawal route. What he couldn't know was that Vera had anticipated these exact reactions based on his background, positioning Blackwood's men specifically to cut off the most logical retreat paths while maintaining the illusion of greater numbers. "Lawrence!" Blackwood called out, his voice echoing across the canyon. "You're facing federal agents under authority of the territorial governor. Your men are surrounded and isolated. Surrender now and avoid bloodshed." Through her field glasses, Vera observed Lawrence's expression harden with calculation rather than fear. He was assessing options, looking for tactical advantage, the response of a professional rather than a common criminal. "I possess legal documentation authorizing inspection of disputed property claims," Lawrence shouted back, attempting to establish legitimate standing. "Any interference with a federal representative constitutes obstruction of justice." Vera had anticipated this response as well. She signaled Blackwood with a mirror flash, initiating the next phase of their operation. Agent Lawrence, Blackwood, responded, his voice carrying formal authority. "You are hereby notified that your credentials have been verified as fraudulent by the Department of Interior. Furthermore, you are wanted for questioning regarding the murder of Marshal Thomas Hollister." This revelation visibly shook several of Lawrence's remaining men. 3 immediately dropped their weapons, stepping away from their commander with hands raised. Lawrence himself showed the first signs of genuine concern, his tactical assessment clearly indicating deteriorating position. The confrontation had reached its critical juncture. The moment Vera had calculated would force Lawrence to choose between surrender and desperate action. Based on his psychological profile and previous operations, she had predicted the latter. True to her assessment, Lawrence suddenly spurred his horse toward what appeared to be a gap in the encirclement, firing his revolver to cover his escape. 2 loyal men followed his breakout attempt, creating covering fire as they charged toward the perceived weakness in the opposition's position. It was, of course, exactly the route Vera had left intentionally exposed, a channeled path leading directly to the most sophisticated trap in her defensive arsenal. As Lawrence's horse rounded the bend at full gallop, the animal's weight triggered a pressure plate concealed beneath seemingly solid ground. Unlike her previous containment systems designed to capture rather than harm, this mechanism had been specifically modified for Lawrence. The ground beneath his charging horse abruptly collapsed into a concealed pit, sending mount and rider tumbling in a cloud of dust and debris. Vera calmly descended from her observation point, mounting Ghost for the short ride to the containment site. By the time she arrived, Blackwood and his men had secured the remaining members of Lawrence's force, most of whom had surrendered without resistance once their leader was captured. Lawrence himself lay at the bottom of the pit trap, his leg pinned beneath his fallen horse. His face registered shock when Vera appeared at the edge, looking down at him with her distinctive mismatched eyes. "Lieutenant Monroe," he said, recognition and disbelief mingling in his voice. "Drummond said you were dead, killed during the final Apache campaign." "Officially, I was," Vera replied calmly, studying him with clinical detachment. "Nightshade Monroe died in service to her country. Vera Donovan claimed a homestead and sought peace. Unfortunately, Senator Drummond made that impossible." Blackwood approached, carrying Lawrence's saddlebags. "Found what we needed, written orders directly from Drummond, including instructions regarding Marshal Hollister and contingencies for permanent resolution of your situation." Vera nodded, satisfaction evident in her measured response. Combined with the secretary's documents, Cross's written orders, and Hollister's evidence, we now have an unbreakable chain connecting Drummond to every aspect of this operation. Lawrence's expression shifted from shock to calculation. Drummond will never face consequences. His political connections cannot survive this level of documented criminal activity, Vera interrupted, especially with a federal judge already initiating investigation and the territorial governor receiving Deputy Clark's evidence packet as we speak. In the distance, dust clouds signaled the approach of riders from the direction of Fort Bridger. Blackwood smiled grimly at the sight. "Judge Harker's federal marshals," he confirmed. "Your telegraph reached him in time after all." Vera surveyed. The captured men being assembled under guard, the documentation secured from Lawrence's possessions, and the approaching federal authorities. The operation had concluded with precision that would have satisfied the most exacting military standards. Minimal casualties, contained opposition, and secured evidence. "Drummond miscalculated severely," Blackwood observed, coming to stand beside her. "He thought he was targeting an isolated widow defending a simple homestead. Instead," Vera replied, her voice carrying the quiet certainty that had once made her the Army's most effective intelligence operative, he provoked a coordinated military response from an opponent who specialized in asymmetric warfare against numerically superior forces. As the federal marshals crested the ridge, Vera felt the weight of her military identity settling back onto her shoulders after years of carefully constructed civilian life. Lieutenant Nightshade Monroe had returned from retirement for one final operation and had demonstrated why her name had once been both respected and feared throughout the Western Territories. The battle for Deadfall Valley was over. The war against Drummond and his corruption had just begun. 3 months later, spring painted Deadfall Valley in a palette of greens and golds as Vera stood on her cabin porch, watching riders approach along the main trail. Unlike the furtive movements of Cross's men or Lawrence's military precision advance, these visitors made no attempt at concealment, 5 figures traveling openly under the territorial governor's standard. Vera recognized Deputy Clark, now wearing the official badge of Territorial Marshal leading the procession. Beside him rode Judge Harker, the weathered former colonel whose legal authority had transformed the evidence against Drummond from incriminating documentation to federal indictments. She made no move to activate any of her defensive measures. These were allies, and more importantly, they brought news she had been anticipating since the climactic confrontation 3 months prior. "Lieutenant Monroe," Harker called as they approached, using her military designation with the easy familiarity of a former commanding officer. Or do you still prefer Mrs. Donovan in these peaceful times? Vera will suffice, she replied, her mismatched eyes warming slightly at the sight of her former commander. Though I suspect your visit suggests the peaceful times may be shorter-lived than hoped. Harker dismounted with the stiff formality of an aging cavalry officer, handing his reins to one of the accompanying territorial agents. Peace is always precarious in the territories, though thanks to your evidence, it's considerably more achievable than before. They settled in Vera's front room, where maps and tactical diagrams had been replaced by more mundane domestic items, though the careful observer might notice how every window still maintained clear fields of fire, and how her chair was positioned to view all possible approaches. Clark, now Marshal Clark, spread official documents across her table. Senator Drummond has been formally charged with conspiracy, corruption, and complicity in Marshal Hollister's murder. The case goes before the federal court next month. His political connections, Vera inquired, knowing from experience how influential men often escape justice through powerful alliances. Dissolved overnight, Harker replied with grim satisfaction. Even his staunchest supporters abandoned him when the territorial papers published evidence of his land seizure operations. Particularly effective was your documentation of the Hanson family farm burning. Vera nodded, recalling the homestead. She'd investigated 6 months earlier, where a family of 5 had supposedly perished in an accidental fire. Her methodical examination had revealed evidence of intentional arson, one of the first pieces in the pattern that had eventually led to Drummond. Copper Ridge mining has been dissolved, Clark continued, indicating a legal notice bearing the territorial governor's seal. All fraudulently obtained properties are being returned to their original owners where possible, or opened to legitimate claims where the owners... He hesitated, uncomfortable with the brutal reality of Drummond's operation, where the owners were eliminated. Vera finished for him, her tone matter-of-fact rather than accusatory. The territories operated by harsher rules than Eastern civilization, a reality she had accepted during her military service rather than denied. Harker cleared his throat, turning the conversation toward practical matters. Your homestead claim has been formally validated by the Territorial Land Office. Additionally, the governor has approved a special dispensation regarding mineral rights. All copper deposits within Deadfall Valley remain under your exclusive control. This was significant news. Traditionally, the territory retained rights to valuable mineral deposits, regardless of surface land ownership. Vera had expected to maintain her homestead, but lose the copper that had drawn Drummond's attention. An unusual arrangement, she observed, studying the official documentation with careful attention to its authenticity. After encountering Lawrence's forgeries, she had become even more meticulous in verifying official communications. The governor feels a special accommodation is warranted, given your service to the territory, Clark explained. Both past military contributions and your recent role in exposing corruption that reached the highest levels of territorial governance. Vera accepted this explanation with a measured nod, though her analytical mind suspected additional motivations. The territory likely preferred having valuable mineral resources controlled by a solitary homesteader with demonstrated loyalty, rather than risk another corporate entity attempting to replicate Drummond's approach. And Cross? She inquired, having heard nothing of the former military scout and his men since their disappearance before the final confrontation. The 3 visitors exchanged meaningful glances before Harker responded. Found 3 weeks ago in a ravine near Silver Creek. Him and his entire crew executed professionally. Single shots to the head, hands bound. Vera absorbed this information without visible reaction, though internally she processed its implications. Drummond eliminating witnesses before trial. That was our assessment, Clark confirmed, until we examined the timing more carefully. Cross and his men were killed while Drummond was already in federal custody in Denver under constant supervision. This development altered the strategic landscape significantly. Another player, Vera concluded, her analytical mind immediately calculating possibilities. Someone connected to Drummond, but operating independently. Harker nodded grimly. We've uncovered evidence suggesting Copper Ridge was merely one element in a larger network of territorial acquisition operations. Different companies, different figureheads, but similar methodologies. The weathered judge removed a leather portfolio from his saddlebag, spreading a new map across Vera's table. Red pins marked locations across 3 territories. Some Vera, recognized from Blackwood's earlier intelligence, others representing new data points in an expanding pattern. 43 suspicious property transfers in the past 2 years, Harker explained. 17 unexplained deaths, all following the same operational signature as Drummond's activities, but spread across different corporate entities with seemingly unrelated ownership. Vera studied the map with the tactical assessment that had once made her the Army's premier intelligence operative in the Western Territories. The pattern was unmistakable to her trained eye, not random opportunism but coordinated strategy, suggesting centralized planning despite the dispersed execution. "You're not here merely to deliver news about Drummond," she observed, looking up from the map to study Harker's expression. "You're recruiting." A thin smile crossed the judge's weathered face. "Your analytical abilities remain undiminished. Lieutenant, the territorial governor has authorized formation of a specialized investigative unit focused on land fraud and associated criminal activities, operating with federal authority but maintaining—" He searched for the appropriate phrasing. Operational flexibility appropriate to territorial conditions. The implication was clear. Official justice sometimes moved too slowly or with too many constraints to be effective in the still wild territories. This new unit would operate in the gray area between formal law enforcement and the intelligence operations Vera had conducted. During the Apache campaigns, Marshal Clark would oversee official legal proceedings, Harker continued, while field operations would require someone with extensive experience in unconventional tactical approaches and intelligence gathering. Vera rose from her chair, moving to the window where she could survey the valley she had defended so effectively. 3 years of peaceful retirement had provided healing after the brutal realities of frontier warfare, but the confrontation with Drummond had awakened the part of her that thrived on strategic challenges. "I built this homestead, seeking quiet after years of conflict," she said, her mismatched eyes scanning the horizon with habitual vigilance. "Now you're asking me to return to that life." "Not exactly," Clark interjected. "This would be different from military service. You'd maintain your homestead as your primary residence and official cover. Operations would be selective, focused, undocumented cases that traditional law enforcement cannot effectively address," Harker approached, standing beside her at the window. "Consider it protecting other homesteaders who lack your unique capabilities, families like the Hansons who never stood a chance against corporate predators with political protection." The invocation of the Hanson family was deliberately calculated to appeal to Vera's sense of justice, a motivation Harker had recognized during their military service together. Despite her clinical approach to operations, protecting innocent settlers had always been her fundamental purpose. "I have conditions," she stated after a measured silence, turning from the window with decision evident in her posture. "The territory is prepared to accommodate reasonable requirements," Harker replied. "Complete operational autonomy. I select my team, determine methodologies, and establish mission parameters without interference from territorial politicians or administrators." Harker nodded, having anticipated this demand. Granted, with the understanding that actions resulting in formal charges must eventually connect with legitimate legal processes. Marshal Clark serves as official liaison and legal authority, Vera continued. No other command structure is imposed between field operations and the Territorial Governor's office. Already established in the operational charter, Clark confirmed. Captain Blackwood and his Pinkerton operatives are contracted as needed, with expenses covered by territorial funds rather than agency billing. This request raised Harker's eyebrows slightly. That may require special budgetary arrangements, but can likely be accommodated given Blackwood's demonstrated effectiveness. Vera's final condition emerged from the strategic assessment that had made her legendary among military planners. Most importantly, this operation remains completely confidential. No public acknowledgement, no official documentation beyond the minimum required for territorial authorization. The moment our existence becomes known to the targets, our effectiveness ends. Harker exchanged glances with Clark, both recognizing the tactical wisdom in her approach. The Territorial Governor has already authorized a special dispensation, classifying all aspects of this unit under executive privilege. Officially, you'll be registered as a special consultant on land management practices. The formalities completed, Vera turned her attention to the operational realities. I'll need complete files on all suspicious acquisitions, witness testimonies, where available, and territorial maps with property boundaries and mineral survey data. Already compiled, Clark assured her, gesturing to additional document cases secured to their saddles, along with personnel files on potential recruits, former scouts, agents, and specialists with relevant skills. As the men prepared to depart, Harker paused at the door, studying Vera with the assessing gaze of a commander evaluating a key officer. The Territorial Governor suggested substantial financial compensation for your role. I informed him that wouldn't be your primary motivation. Vera's expression softened slightly, a rare acknowledgement of personal connection. You always did understand your officers, Colonel. Not always, he admitted with unexpected candor. But I recognized exceptional talent when I encountered it. The Apache campaigns would have ended very differently without Nightshade's intelligence operations. After the visitors departed, Vera remained on her porch, watching their dust trail disappear toward Copper Springs. The valley stretched before her, peaceful, productive, the home she had built seeking respite from years of conflict. Yet the map spread across her table inside revealed a larger pattern of injustice that continued unabated across the territories. Families like the Hansons remained vulnerable to corporate predators, operating beyond the reach of traditional law. Vera's mismatched eyes narrowed as she surveyed her domain with new purpose. The defensive traps and containment systems she had, created to protect her homestead, had proven effective against direct threats. Now she would expand that protection across the territories, using the skills that had once made her the Army's most feared intelligence operative. Lieutenant Nightshade Monroe had returned to service, not as a military officer, but as something perhaps more effective, a shadow operative with territorial authority, defending homesteaders against enemies who believed themselves beyond the reach of justice. The widow of Deadfall Valley would continue tending her garden and maintaining her cabin, while Nightshade would once again haunt the borderlands between civilization and lawlessness, ensuring that predators who targeted innocent settlers encountered defenses they never anticipated. Some mistakes you only make once, and crossing Lieutenant Vera Nightshade Monroe would remain the last mistake many would ever make. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.